Kia ora. Hello. This week, we are going to touch on the final skills you need before embarking on building an impression. This is what I call the why of items. This video is useful to both new and experienced reenactors. Previously, I've discussed the processes on how to research an impression. In that video, I talked about how to research your impression and the items you want to recreate. In this video, I will look at better understanding the items you want to recreate and putting them in the correct context. This video will be an important launching pad for upcoming videos in the series, where we deal directly with the changing fashions, styles, and building impressions within social classes. Stay tuned for those. When building an impression, it can go further than making sure that you are getting the correct sword for your period, or that gown you are making has the right Italian cut, so it is more accurate, although these are very important things. This is about understanding why items are correct, how they came to be, and the context they existed in. Just so you know, I'm going to be saying context a whole lot in this one. I believe there are two things that are important to the process of reenactment and how we as reenactors and living historians can better understand the people and cultures we are recreating. These are the study of material culture and experimental archaeology. First, let me address what I mean when I talk about material culture. We have used this term before in our videos without giving an explanation or any context. Material culture is the physical items of a culture such as buildings, tools, clothing, weapons, and even food that is created by a people. From an archaeological and by extension living history perspective, it is through the study of these objects we gain a better understanding of those who own them, as the objects were left behind preserved their cultural practices. If you're interested in knowing more about this, with the usual links and sources, I've included a link to a free short course you can do which covers the study of material culture. When we look at an item that we wish to recreate, it is easy enough to look at an object, copy it, and be done with it. A hat is a hat, or shoes are shoes, right? Right? Perhaps, if we look at items as more than just, well, things, we can understand how they came to be and better understand the people using them. Why did they place a design on something instead of leaving it plain? It is easy enough to say that this is the practice of the time, which is true. It is fashionable to decorate things. It may be that this is because of local fashion or cultural practices. But what if the item was imported? Are the designs foreign or local copies of foreign patterns? Does it have religious or ritual significance? Did the item belong to a person of particular rank or social class? This may impact the ownership, materials used in manufacture, the design, or use of the item. With investigation of material culture, we can better understand the people who own these items and their cultural practices. In turn, this allows us to understand if the items that we are using are correct for us to use in our impressions. A hat made for a bishop that is only to be used during liturgical ceremony would not be appropriate to be recreated and worn by someone who is not depicting a bishop, or even a person depicting a bishop who is not practicing ritual. If we are referring to our video on building our impression of a pilgrim, we see common items worn and carried by pilgrims, such as the scrip and the staff. These had a specific cultural significance and appear only to be used in the context of the pilgrim. There were hidden meanings to these items, something that communicated a message to those around them. This is something that as reenactors we should not include in our other impressions. The recreation of these items did not appear overnight. They slowly evolved and were adopted by people and their culture until finally the uniform or costume of the pilgrim became recognizable and distinguishable from common wear. The evolution of fashion is a byproduct of many things within society. The way people dress is created by many different influences. During the Second World War, for example, hemlines went up to preserve much needed fabric. In the post-war boom, dresses again became longer and fuller as a sign of newfound wealth and a rejection of wartime austerity. Experimental archaeology can also help us understand the why of items. The manufacture of items also drives design and fashion. Increased loom widths and fast production and guild organisation in the late medieval period, for example, led to the use of more fabrics in clothing as fabric became cheaper. By understanding this, we can use experimental archaeology to better recreate these items. If, say for example, the fabric was woven by a home weaver, the yardage of the fabric would be smaller. To sew a garment, the width of panels would be constrained by the maximum width of the fabric. This accounts for the fashion of earlier periods, which is constrained by the loom width and the inherent cutting needs of the tailor. But what if we are reconstructing an item? What if there are parts of it that have a function that are not clear, or there are extraneous parts or holes that don't make sense? Maybe when we look at a picture of an item or an artifact itself, we can sometimes wonder at the construction methods. Short of pulling it apart to reverse engineer its construction, we are left with our best guess when making our own reconstruction. This is where experimental archaeology comes into its own. We can use periods, tools, and skills to recreate objects. This can explain the processes behind certain features. Perhaps when something is located on an object, it is an artifact of the manufacturing process, so it is included in its design. This can be such things like the flashing left over on a cast object or the inclusion of selvage on a garment. Things that we would not see in the modern manufacturing process, but something that would be seen in many period items. I'm sure many of you have more examples of this from your years of recreating items. Please share them, as I find the discovery of how items were created fascinating. It is my assertion that through the crafting of items, we can better understand the why of items. Coupled with the study of material culture, we are able to better understand the context of who we are creating. If I'm portraying a knight at tournament, I would be arrayed differently than a knight at war. The context of my costume and the possessions are different, and the relation to those around me changes. If I'm in the costume of a carpenter plying my trade, my tools and dress all have a reference point to that specific task. Does that mean I have been able to capture an accurate representation of all of that person's life through the study of the material culture of carpentry items from that period? Take, for example, my job in the modern world. I have a work clothing, a computer, desk, the chair, and all the material items needed for that job. I have a relationship with those items. They define me at that time as a worker. Once work is done, I cease to be a worker, but that relationship still exists. Those items don't stop existing, neither do I. 100 years from now, someone could try to recreate an impression of me just from those items. Why? I don't know. Maybe the most boring reenactor ever. But they would get some glimpse into who I was. I've left something of myself in the interaction with those items. However, to rely solely on just those items as a way to build an impression of me, all they could do is build an impression of me as a worker doing that job. This is why understanding the why of items is important. If I want to depict a carpenter, I want to understand them not just as a two-dimensional figure. I want to understand their place in society. Were carpenters poor or rich or both? Where did their tools come from? How were their tools made? If I'm able to do this, I'm able to present a high quality impression because the items I make and buy are informed by the culture and the thinking of the time.
Oh, hi. I didn't see you there. Means you must have enjoyed the video. So like, comment and subscribe. And remember, stay safe, have fun, and keep reenacting.